Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome back, Bookends, to our debut Spotlight series, where we shine a light on the freshest authors and their work. Today, the spotlight shines on the hilarious and brilliant debut novel, Sad Girl Novel. We meet Kim, an Australian expat, as she tries her very best to not become the centre of a sad girl novel.
Finkemeyer is a writer based in Melbourne. Her fiction has been listed for the Desperate Literature Short Fiction Prize, the Raquel Prize for Emerging Writers, the Disquiet Literary Prize, and was nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Pip co-founded the Berlin-based Sign Nothing to See Here and completed a Master's in Publishing and Editing at RMIT. Her first novel, Sad Girl Novel, is out now and published by Ultimo Press in Australia and New Zealand and by Hatchet in the UK and US. And we're delighted to have Pip with us today. So Pip, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Thank you.
We're so thrilled to have you. And can I just do as a disclaimer to anyone listening, all our bookends, we have devoured this book. We have absolutely devoured it. Me and Hannah were both up reading this novel last night and honestly could not put it down. So we cannot recommend this one enough.
And it is going to be responsible for many a late night. So
yes. Right. Just a warning, like if you're going to pick it up, just make sure that you're somewhere comfy because you're then not going to be able to put it down till you finish. I can testament to that. We always love to start our podcast by asking my favourite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
Yeah, well, I'm reading a book called Body Friend. Well, that's the book I'm reading for fun. I'm reading a lot of stuff for research during the day for my second novel, but it's very dry. I don't think I'll spare everybody those recommendations. But for pleasure, I'm reading this book called Body Friend, which is by Katherine Brabon. She's a fellow Melbourne writer. So it just came out here. It's coming out in the UK in a couple of months. And it's about a lot of my favorite things. It's about this woman who is recovering from surgery. That's not one of my favorite things, but she's going to the pool to recover, and she meets this other woman at the pool who's like eerily similar to her, and they strike up this friendship. So it's about female friendships. It's about swimming at the pool, and it's sort of about writing the body, which is something that's really difficult to do. And she does it really well, and it's just like a pleasure to read such beautiful sentences. I think the prose is sort of like swimming, kind of glides along and cuts through. I love it.
Oh, well, that's getting added to my list.
No, don't, because it really bothers me. I made the error early on of following too many book bloggers that are based in like Australia or New Zealand, and they post a lot of these amazing books, and then I go to search them and then I can't get them here. So I'm always like there's so many. I've got a list of books that haven't yet come out here that I'm like waiting for. And I listened to the podcast. I don't know if you've listened to it. It's called Shameless. They're amazing. It's such a great podcast, but they're based in Australia as well. And they reference these Australian-based authors and these books that sound great. And then I'm like, I can't get them. And it really frustrates me.
Yeah, the publishing world is so interesting like that. Like we still have to wait for things depending on which territory we're in, which is... Mm-hmm. I don't think something has to do much for TV and film anymore. Mm. But I did go online and check that it was coming out in the UK before I recommended it.
Amazing.
Oh, she's on it.
What a hero. But is it Diana Reid that is quite big in Australia? And I was waiting ages for her book to come out here because it was so big there. And her book only came out last year, and then we just got her second novel as well, I think. So yeah, we need more. For any publishing people listening, like give us more Australian authors.
We need it, please.
Yeah, I love Diana's books as well. And my book in the UK version has a giant Diana Reid quote on the back.
Yeah,
as well.
I saw that.
Beautiful.
For Diana's
I mean, can I just say that Diana Reid has called this novel a stroke of genius? So high praise indeed. I'd be very proud of that.
It's that's crazy, especially because I think the central question for Kim for the whole novel is like, am I a genius or am I delusional? So it's nice to get that from Diana. I'm sure Kim would feel very validated. So
would absolutely.
100%. Now, before we get into the book, I want to ask you a question that we ask all of debut authors in this series, and that is to get more on what your experience has been like in having your debut novel published. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. I've had a pretty dream run, but that's not to say that it's all been easy. But I wrote this over from 2019 for about 3 years. And then basically as soon as I finished it, I reached out to an agent that I had been in touch with already and signed with her. And then we went out on submission in Australia, New Zealand, and the US and the UK roughly the same time, and ended up getting a deal pretty quickly. So yeah, some of my friends who were on submission a lot longer, they kind of just tell me to like just shut up whenever I complain about anything, because I only have to wait like a week, and I think it can be because you can be waiting a really long time. Editors obviously have inboxes full of amazing manuscripts to read, so that was really good. And then so I published with Ultimo Press in Australia and New Zealand, and that happened first. And it's been a pretty dream run. They're kind of a new publisher, so yeah, they have a really good list. Diana Reid's also on the list, and Body Friend, the other book I was talking about. And like, honestly, the thing I was most nervous about was seeing the cover, but I really love the cover. And yeah, it was weird, like knowing a year in advance or more, like that I kind of had a year to get used to it, but then all my friends and family, like they had to wait.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Did you have much, sorry Hannah, did you have much input into like the cover design or anything like that? Or were you just like, you had to just cross your fingers and hope it was going to be brilliant, which it is?
I didn't actually, but I kind of trust. I think that's one thing I've learned from the publishing process is that this is the first time I've done it, but the people I'm working with do it again and again and again. So I trust them. It's the same in the editorial process. Like I'm not very, I have a good sense of when to push back when I want to keep something, but if someone makes a suggestion, I'm usually pretty open-minded to it. And it was the same with the cover. And I think it worked out amazingly. It's interesting that the UK market is different from the Australian market. So that's why I have two different covers, but I love both of them. They're like my children. I couldn't pick a favorite. Yeah.
What is the Australian cover like?
I could show you, but it's referencing the train thing a lot more, because originally this book I had titled it Departure because there's a lot of train references in there. So one of the first things I knew about it was that it was going to be based on 3 incidents that the character has with strangers on a train in Berlin, so either the S-Bahn or the U-Bahn. And a lot of it is about train travel and stuff, and that's just because I'm really into trains. So there's a set of train doors on there, and there's also like a statue instead of a girl, which I think is referencing the sad girl thing as well.
Love that.
I'm immediately like, I'm going to Google it.
Yeah, it's interesting learning about the cover process, and I think it's different for everybody. Some people do get a say, and then if you're like an established name, I think you can have more of a pared back, like arty cover. But if nobody knows who you are, then your cover really has to like tell more of a story of what's inside the book.
But it is a fantastic cover, and I love it so much. Now, moving on to the book itself, which I'm desperate to talk to you about. The first thing that I really want to talk to you about is Kim, who is the main character in this book. And there is a wonderful kind of irreverence about her. And she has this brilliant personality that's full of contradictions. Like literally she can contradict herself in the space of a sentence. It's so fantastic. I just love her energy. What was it like to build her character, and why did you choose certain attributes for her?
Yeah, I think Kim, definitely has very black and white thinking. She either thinks she's going to be like extremely successful or a complete failure, and those are her two options. And she's constantly like ping-ponging between the two. And I think that's I wanted to include that because that's how a lot of people think when they're young, that it's either going to be the best or the worst. And the answer is it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. So I wanted Kim to be, and her sense of humor, I think, is reflective of basically the fact that I was consuming a lot of Twitter in the time that I was writing the book, and there's a certain sense of humor on there. But I think it's interesting because when you're consuming jokes online, whether it's like a meme or a tweet or whatever, the context lets you know that it's a joke. But when you take something of that tone and then put it in between some literary prose, I think it's a bit unclear which parts are jokes. And so it's been surprising to me that people have taken some things at face value, which I really always intended to be as a joke. But I really like that that's happened as well. But for Kim's character, like in the beginning, I did base her on like making fun of myself. So she's like a version of me, a younger, sillier version. Sort of took on her own life and she went in another direction and became her own person, which made her more interesting for me to write as well.
She is such an interesting character, isn't she?
She's great. She's absolutely great. And there was so many moments in the book that I was just like laughing out loud, and my boyfriend was like, "What are you laughing at?" Like, and there's so many pages that I folded down, and Lydia's gonna hate this, but I like do little quote little bits, you know. I didn't underline anything. I just, like to mark the little bits that I like. Lydia's
buy yourself some tabs. Buy yourself
like
some
tabs. I don't like them.
No tarnish. You don't need to be tarnishing nothing.
I'm not tarnishing them. It's just like a little marker around the sentences. I think. Are you offended by that? That I did that to your book?
No, I actually love it. And it's an idea that I just seeing people on Instagram like tag me that they've underlined and like scribbled, dare I say scribbled in the book. It gave me an idea to start doing it myself, because I recently reread a book that I read when I was in uni, and I had like underlined it and written little notes, and it was so cute to reread it and see what I liked. Yeah. And it was all about writing a novel, and I was like, oh, this kind of went into my novel like 10 years later. But I think it's cool. I've started putting a little pencil in my novel when I read now, so I can feel like I think I'm working if I have a pencil in my hand when I'm reading.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, because I was speaking about folding down pages and underlining little bits, I have actually got a quote that I want to share with the listeners. Are you okay with me reading out parts of your book back to you? Yeah. So this is a part that I really loved, which explores the differences in gender when it comes to confidence in your creativity. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Women lacked confidence in a way that was deeply familiar to me. It was me. It was my essence. How I'd been taught to think too. You probably don't deserve anything you want. Then there were the boys who thought they deserved to write a novel. Boys with the unearned confidence of kings. Boys who read exactly one book, such as Sapiens or Moneyball, then decided that qualified them to write a memoir about losing their virginity in college or something. And I could go on because there's more to that, but I just loved that bit so much. And I thought it was so interesting, and it brought up so many questions for me on like who gets to tell their stories and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's so fascinating, the differences between men and women in like their confidence in their creativity and in sort of creating art and producing their art. And I wanted to ask you, as you wrote this, obviously, why do you think there is such a difference in the way women perceive themselves as creatives or as artists?
I wish I knew why, but I think it's just, it was amazing to sort of go to open mic nights and nights where people were reading. And I had so many female friends that would come along and sort of study what was being read and go home and work on their stories and not even apply and be like, even though they were writing at a pretty high level, they just didn't think they were there yet. And then at the same events, I would meet men that just like had never been before or never tried to write anything before, but just like got up and read the thing about the guy who wrote a story about losing his virginity, that happened. And he went straight into like asking me for advice and, where could he publish it and all this stuff. Like not one single piece of positive feedback, just kind of felt like it needed to be in the world. And which is kind of cool for him, I guess. But I think it's just really evident that I think women feel like they need to work a little bit harder in order to be taken seriously, which is not the way it should be, but it's the way it is. Mm-hmm. I saw a tweet the other day about there was this really prestigious residency announced here, and I think 33 of the 35 spots went to women and 2 went to men. And someone was asking why that was. And because when it comes to the manuscripts submitted to publishers, the split is still 50-50. So it's just that in terms of seeking out opportunities to get better and to work with people who can mentor you, women seek out those opportunities a lot more. But in terms of having a manuscript that they think is publishable, it's still split evenly. So I don't know the answer to just sort of encouraging women just to go for it and skip all those steps ahead of like thinking you have to do due diligence and sort of like pay your dues before you're successful. You really don't. You can just sort of do whatever you want and like skip straight to the front of the queue if you want.
Love that.
I hope that inspires many a woman to go ahead and do exactly that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And I find it so funny that, because that was going to be my next question, was about the guy in the book, and she's talking about, you know, being asked for advice and stuff like that. And I wanted to ask if that had actually happened to you. So that's brilliant that actually did.
That happened. And then something happened to a friend of mine. Like a lot of it is like amalgamated stories that happened to friends of mine. But basically the guy she was seeing said he was taking time off to like work on a novel. And then when he showed her the novel, it was just like he'd copy and pasted a bunch of like stories from Reddit. And this is my draft. These are my inspiration. So yeah.
So bad.
Yeah, but also like I do meet a lot of people. Since I'm publishing the book, I've met a lot of people who are sort of working on their first book or short stories or whatever, and they're always asking like in the most nice, like genuine way for advice. And I think you really just need to figure out how to trick yourself into having the confidence to do it, which is sort of a central theme of the book, as well as like writing is a confidence trick, and it's all about figuring out how to just tell yourself whatever you need to tell yourself in order to think that you're good enough. And delusion is your best friend sometimes within reason. Yeah, it's nobody else, especially with writing. It's such a solitary individual pursuit. No one else can really come along and be like, you know, you need to do this. You should keep going. You should write a novel. I think it needs to come from within, but it's not like there's some switch you can flip to actually give you that feeling, which is what you're struggling with for like the entire novel.
I think as me and Hannah are both actors, and when you talk about kind of like self-delusion, like we practice that daily, like because you have to walk into a room knowing that you're going to get the part or knowing that you're the best person for it, and it's like 99.9% of the time not true. You know, because it's just not going to happen. But you cannot go in with any doubt, because you're not going to be able to sell yourself the same way. And I think that, you know, that is something that I find really interesting, is that a lot of people don't know how to do that. But obviously me and Hannah have been trained to do that. But I think it's a really good asset to have sometimes, is to be able to tell yourself like, I'm absolutely fine. I'm going to do really well here. And having that kind of, even though it's not real and it is a bit of a facade, you know, having that kind of self-awareness of being like, okay, well, I'm fine and it's going to be fine. It really does work. Like I cannot recommend it enough to people. Like, you know, sometimes you have to be a bit delusional.
Yeah, I think it's really effective. And I think maybe something like acting would be harder because you're all constantly brushing up with like someone else's reality. So you can be delusional to a certain point, and then you need someone to like affirm that. But with writing, it's like you can be delusional for like 3 years by yourself. And then you only find out at the end whether it's good or not. A real test of how talented your imagination is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank goodness that you had the confidence to write this novel, because it is a brilliant book. And one of my favorite characters, or I should say relationships in the book, was between Kim and her therapist Debbie. And the conversations they have are genius. It's just so brilliant. And there is a little quote about her name that actually made me laugh so loud. And I'll just quickly read it to you. So she's telling us about her therapist, Debbie. I nicknamed her Debbie because she reminded me of a German version of a modern day Debbie Harry, and also because Deborah was her actual name. And I was just like, fantastic. Of course you did. And honestly, I don't know why. Again, Hannah knows this, but our bookends listener will know this. There's always one line in a book that will get me, and that got me. And I was like, this is it now. This is too funny. But I'd say their relationship is really key to Kim's kind of self-awareness and her self-analysis in a way. what was it like creating their dynamic and figuring out what their relationship was going to be like?
I think it was pretty fun. Like that line that you read out, it was kind of like me being lazy because I wanted people to think of Debbie as Debbie Harry. So I was like, well, she's kind of like Debbie Harry, and I'll call her Debbie.
I love it.
But it was fun. It was like, I mean, it was fun writing about people in therapy in Berlin because everybody that I knew there was in therapy, and it's also free because of the compulsory health insurance that you need for your visa. So, and there's a lot of terrible therapists around, a lot of good ones, but a lot of terrible ones. So and it's very cultural therapy. So I think people underestimated like coming from America, England, or Australia, and then being in therapy with a German woman who kind of like tells you how it is. There's a lot of like funny mishaps. And so I had a lot of material and stories to go off for Debbie. And I just also really loved her. Like, but she's sort of like a maternal figure, but that mixed with like a typical sort of like older East German woman who, you know, you wouldn't want to get in an argument with, sort of like the ladies that worked at the supermarkets in Berlin who scared the crap out of me. And I've always been nervous that I wasn't like bagging my items up fast enough. But also having a therapist is a really good way to have your characters speak about their internal world, but not in their inner monologue, but still say things that are very private. And I think a lot of good books and films feature a therapist for that reason, because you can't really have conversations like that with your friends unless you're like this really like self-aware, in touch with your feelings person. And I think, yeah, a lot of our friendships, we're not being completely honest with ourselves or with each other. We're kind of portraying a version of ourselves that we want to be in the presence of that person, particularly with Kim and Belle. So having those scenes with Kim and Debbie, I could get to some like really vulnerable parts of Kim that she would never have shown to other people. And plus, I just loved playing on like the cultural differences between the two approaches, like the German directness and the Australian irreverence is what I'll call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Berlin somewhere that you've also lived?
Yeah, I lived there for 5 years. I left in 2020. So I moved there sort of with the idea of writing more because I had never really been able to find the time. I worked around books. So I was a bookseller, and I worked in publishing and studied publishing, and then moved to Berlin where I couldn't do any of that because of language. And then sort of started again in Berlin and worked part-time. But I thought it would be a really good place to start to write because it's a cheap place to live and there's a lot of creatives there. And it turned out to be pretty true. It was like really easy to fall into a group of writers. And I don't think I would have been able to write a novel if I wasn't friends with other people who were going through similar things and didn't have people to show my excerpts to and the encouragement of them. And I still sort of remember the first chapter of the book is basically what I submitted to class the first time I'd ever written any of the novel. And I still remember like people's feedback to certain characters. I remember the German guy in class telling me that no German woman would ever be called Debbie and I should change her name. And I was like, no, she's Debbie.
Gotta be.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a really good place to like learn how to be a writer. And also I think when you're in your 20s, you do have a lot of sort of fears hanging off you about whether you're any good or like what would you even write about if you wanted to be a writer, and moving to another country and just implanting yourself in a different place is a really good way to like shake all of that off. And now I've come home and I feel like a different person. But yeah, I came home in about 2020. So I started writing this book when I lived there and then kept going after I'd moved back to Melbourne, but we were like in lockdown. And so it was a really nice way, like transcribing all the details of my old life there was a really nice way to like process leaving and to make sure that little details wouldn't like just fall out of my memory. And also I really miss my friends. So a lot of the female characters in this book, like there's like brushstrokes of different friends in different moments. So it was like kind of a lovely experience to write it.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you definitely got a sense of your love for that place, which is why I was so curious if you'd lived there yourself. I don't know if you just like visited or something, but it certainly came through. And I always love when a setting is like really well written. And obviously you wrote in the book about New York and about Berlin, and my brain has just glitched because
yeah. Marrakesh was
yeah, Marrakesh, that was the one. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And you write about place so well, and but especially Berlin, you wrote all these cultural references as you mentioned. But yeah, we loved the character of Debbie. She was so great. And I think it's so fascinating, looking at the way different places respond to things like therapy, because I think it is such a cultural thing. Some places would be like, don't be ridiculous, like, why have you got a therapist, kind of a reaction to it, whereas other cultures will really embrace it. And I always think that's so interesting. I wanted to ask, you just mentioned friends, and I loved the way you wrote about female friendship in the book, and I loved Kim's best friend Belle, and I just loved the dynamic between them, because it always felt like one of them was anchoring the other, and it was so brilliantly written and yet so funny and moving, and there was like a real warmth to it as well, and it reminded me of a lot of my female friendships. So I wanted to ask you, what inspired their dynamic?
Yeah, it's sort of what you're saying with the cultural differences. I think that was one of the inspirations, is that because Belle's German and Turkish and Kim is Australian, and sort of the different ways they speak to each other I found really interesting. Like, I had so many funny interactions with German women who are just so direct and confident, and I also, I mean, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. I'll get back to the question.
I love that.
We got a tangent, we've told you.
But like, I did notice that women get treated differently in Germany than in Australia. Like, at work, I was allowed to finish my sentences. And, I felt like people listened to me more. And I also felt like maybe women were more assertive in general, which is weird. I never would have thought that was a problem here until I went somewhere else. But so that's why Debbie is such a strong character, because it was just something I was observing. But at the same time, she really reminds me of like all the women in my family as well, who are just like of a certain age and just don't give a crap about anything anymore, which is like very aspirational, I think. But then when it comes to like Kim and Belle, I found that it was weird. There's so many books about female friendship, but I had never seen one portray that rang true to what my friendships were like. So I just wanted to capture the sort of back and forth and that type of friendship when you're so comfortable with someone that you're not keeping up graces or airs anymore. You can be completely petty, and then you can like discuss your pettiness and laugh about it. And I think a lot of good fiction is also about two people who are making up for what the other lacks, and they can't even see it about themselves. And maybe that's because when a writer writes characters, they're like splitting themselves into two, and both characters are like two halves of the person that created them. And I sort of feel that way about these characters. Like, everyone assumes that I'm Kim, but I actually think I sort of have more of the like boring, pragmatic side of Belle sometimes. But it definitely was, Belle was like sort of my ode to a few of my friends from Berlin that I had to leave behind, who it's not like they passed away. I still talk to them and I still go back and visit them. But yeah, I just thought it was a very special thing, our friendships. And I think that there's still this idea that when you move overseas, like the best thing that can happen is some big romance, like you'll fall in love. And obviously that's really nice that happens too. But I think what's more realistic is that you kind of have all these platonic loves, then you meet all these amazing friends, and it's just it should be obvious, but it's not that obvious that like obviously the love of your life is probably going to be one of your friends in the long term, maybe. Yeah,
I love that. I love the and I always reference it, the quote from Sex and the City, but it's about like your friends being your soulmates, and guys are just the people that you have fun with, and and I love that so much, because I think it's only something that I ever see in female friendships, that we have this sort of like love for each other that kind of goes beyond anything. You never really see that with guys. Yeah, they have like love for each other, but there's always kind of a distance kept, whereas I think like women don't really, like, we kind of lack those boundaries with each other. but in like a positive way. It's a positive thing. It's a great thing. And it's a beautiful thing as well. And I think, you articulated that so well. And I also just want to add in here, just because we're speaking about Belle, I loved Baby.
Oh, baby.
It was such a great little addition to the book. And yeah, I just thought it was so brilliant, and how much involvement that Kim had in Belle's sort of like, experience with motherhood and her experience with birth as well. She was so involved in that. And I think as well, that's another thing that is so specific to like female friendships, and that like, we do get involved in the big things in each other's lives. And I think there's real beauty in that. So yeah, I thought it was so beautiful the way you articulated that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Baby. Originally, I called Baby because I thought Kim was so jealous of Baby taking Belle's attention that she wouldn't want to like engage too much or like call Baby by their name. But then I just thought the name Baby worked really well, especially because in German, Das Baby, it's like, it's the same as English. You just call it baby, and it's a gender neutral term. And I wanted Baby to be a baby and be able to like choose their own gender as I grew up. But in terms of Kim being there for the birth, I was always looking for how Kim could be a good friend to Belle, because Belle is such a good friend to Kim, and Kim doesn't really know how lucky she is until the end, I think. So I wanted it to be believable that, both women had their own little acts of creation going on at the same time, but they intersected and they both contributed to the other one, maybe in more ways than they knew originally.
I love it, honestly. And I think that a lot of the time, you do a great job of making it feel so genuine. Their relationship is so genuine. And I think it's really hard because I don't know what it is, but I can spot a fake friendship from a mile away in a book, and it just, I know when something isn't coming across like it's real, like it's like, grounded in feeling. But with their relationship, it really was. And again, like you were saying, it reminded me of friendships in my life. And it's just brilliant that you've been able to capture that, because it's not an easy thing to do at all. I'm just like piling on the praise. But I also love that sad girl novel. It's sort of a misnomer, and I think that a lot of the time nowadays, I think we are kind of saturated with, in the publishing industry, I'm a bookseller myself, with kind of these typical types of women who are now, they're all about being, sad and miserable and and angsty and, celebrating that. And that's fantastic. But I do feel like we've got to a point where there's so much about that people are forgetting about the authenticity of women, and where they can be sad and they can, indulge themselves in that way. But there's also so much more to it. And you capture that really well with this book, because, it is funny, it is self-aware. And I think that it's such an interesting trend at the moment. Why do you think that sad girl novels, as we call them, are particularly popular at the moment?
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about, because my relationship to sad girl novels has really changed since I wrote a book called Sad Girl Novel. When I first heard the term, I think it was probably 2018 to 2019, which is when this book is set. And I just sort of didn't think about it that deeply. I thought it was funny and that it was useful for me because it helped me find more of what I like. And I think that that's the best role that genre can play, is that it just connects the right readers with the right books. And, at its simplest, that's what it's supposed to do. But then, obviously I've been thinking and writing and talking about the genre a lot. And there is, to me, it's just hard to separate, sort of draw a clear line around which books are sad girl novels. I mean, I know I could have a go at it, but every book is sort of about sadness or some sort of offshoot of sadness, like unease or disillusionment or malaise or whatever. And I think the reason that they've exploded now is because there's been like a big cultural shift in like the foundations, which has turned on some like forced it and allowed young women to write more, and young women are writing about young women. So therefore you get the girl part of the sad girl novel. So for me, it's like kind of hard because every novel does explore sadness. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very good novel. So you could go back to like Bell Jar. I mean, people would call that a sad girl novel, or like Anna Karenina. Like you could even call her a sad girl. But I think, yeah, it's come to a point where I think when some people say sad girl novel, they're talking about something that I don't think that it is, which is like someone who's like wallowing in despair, who's like, you know, sort of like emaciated and like given up. And I don't think that the protagonists need to be like that. I actually think the thing that if you were going to try and define it, it would probably be something to do with the sense of humor of the books, which is the opposite of sadness. Or well, humor and sadness are like connected in this inextricable way. Wow, tricky word. I think the thing that helps you identify it is that they're actually darkly funny, and they're portraying characters that are far from perfect and not constantly apologizing for the flaws of the character. And I think that's a great thing. And I also think we need to give readers some credit and realize they don't take things super literally. Like, just because there's a super sad woman in the book, it's not like we're trying to push like some sad agenda. And like, it's a character in a book, and it's fun to look through, like, experience shitty things via them because you don't actually have to deal with them. But yeah, I think the rise of an unlikable woman has a lot to do with it, because nobody wants like a sanitized, pitch perfect character. So I think that's probably a big part of it. Also, I think the pandemic might have maybe made everybody tap into a certain melancholy or introspectiveness, and maybe it was somehow therapeutic to read about women who are like laying around on the couch feeling sad when you're laying around on the couch feeling sad. I don't know. It could be that as well. But I have definitely felt differently about the genre at different times. But at the same time, like, a lot of books that I've loved and like really identified with have people, you could definitely call them sad girl novels. So yeah.
I'm trying to think what the like OG sad girl novel would be. Would it be like Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation? Would you say it's that?
I definitely say that.
Yeah.
I think yes. And I loved that book. But it doesn't mean, I don't think it's supposed to be taken literally, obviously.
No. There is a part of myself that is always tempted to take myself off.
Just, take the
year
myself
away.
Go into oblivion.
Yeah. Oh, it would be nice.
Oh, yeah, it would be.
But like, books are all about fantasies, and I think sleeping for a year is the ultimate fantasy.
Oh, the ultimate fantasy. What I would do for a year of sleep.
Yeah. I'd just have one night, please.
You and your 2 kids. Sorry, lad.
I know. I honestly might give them away. God knows. Need sleep.
For any listeners, that is a fantasy of Lydia's, so nobody's misconstruing.
Honestly, it really is.
Well, I'm just going to apologise, Pip, because we do, like to read authors' books back to them. It's a really bad habit that we've got, but I also think it's a sign that your book has resonated in so many ways, and we love it. And this is what I meant, by the way. I don't know if you can see these little markers. Like where, so it's not quite underlining it, because if I gave it to somebody else to read it, I didn't want them to be angry at me. But then I was like, I also want to highlight the bits that I love. Lydia, stop, please.
I've said nothing. Don't know what you're on about.
I really wanted to read this out because I think it will resonate with a lot of people, and especially with any debut authors that are listening. And it's a quote about rejection. And I have a lot of thoughts on rejection, obviously, as we're actors. There's a lot of feelings on that. So I'm just going to read this. Writing is a life of rejection, he started. If you go ahead with trying, you need to know that and be okay with it. You need to make rejection your friend. Become accustomed to seeing its face at your writing desk, your dinner table. Anywhere or anytime you slow down for a minute to breathe, it will catch up with you. You only succeed if you make it an intimate friend. If you raise a metaphorical glass to it and say, without you, there'd be no writing, no living. So, welcome to my table, old friend. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of looking at it. Because as you can probably see by our faces, we've experienced a fair amount of rejection with acting. And, you know, as any creators will understand, like, it's tough. It's not an easy thing to experience. And I'd love to know what your own experience with rejection has been like. Obviously, we heard at the start you telling us about how smooth sailing your experience has been like in having your debut published. But have you experienced rejection prior to that with any other parts of your writing life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I first started writing short stories and deciding to submit them to like small literary journals and stuff, like the majority of them don't get accepted. And if I looked at the stats, like they would not be good. But I have to say, I think the inverse of that is like everything that's ever been written getting published, which is not a good reality. You know, like there needs to be rejection, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go into a bookstore and like read everything that someone somewhere thought should be a book.
Yeah.
You know, like unfortunately, like the gatekeeping does serve a purpose, but the rejection doesn't stop even after you've had big success. I think that's another thing. It's not like you're getting rejected and rejected and rejected, and then one day you get the yes, and then from then on it's all yeses. Even with acting, I'm sure it's the same.
Yeah.
So like I still, like if I go into a bookstore, I still like can't help but look over in the section under the S and be like, do they have my book? Do you know what I mean? And usually they do, but like it's, you know, there's still failure after you publish. There could be. And basically it's just always going to be there. And I think one way to deal with rejection would be to look at the person that actually got selected and realize, and then read that story. Or I remember getting rejected to read at a night, like a literary night in Berlin that I thought was really cool. And they had like picked the theme. I suggested the theme based on a story that I wanted to read, which was like blood or something. And then I had written a story about blood, and then I didn't get picked. And I remember being really like irrationally annoyed about that or sad or whatever. And then I went along anyway, and I saw the people that they picked, and I was like, oh, well, like they're also talented. Their stories are great. Like when you can see like the flesh and blood of the person that got picked, you feel a bit less shitty about it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But also, yeah, I just think there is no life without rejection. So you just have to keep going.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah. You do. You do.
Yeah, but
It's
also
hard.
you might be grateful for it in the long run. I think I've submitted stuff that I'm very glad is not out in the world, because I look back on it now and I do not like it. So, but yeah, with the novel, it's very ironic because I wrote about it thinking, when I was writing it, I was doing it out of a compulsion to write it, just thinking I would get it out of the way, and then I'd sort of go on to a different life because I don't know anyone that's a novelist, or like I didn't think it was possible. So I was sort of preparing myself for the ultimate rejection at the end of writing the novel, and then that didn't happen, and then I had to deal with that new reality. Not that I want someone to feel sorry for me or whatever, but I just wasn't prepared for success, right? And I think that something like one of my friends' agents said to them was, writers are only prepared for rejection and failure. They're never prepared for success. They don't know what to do when it happens to them.
I can understand that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we thank goodness that you were not rejected with this novel, because it is incredible and we have devoured it. And cannot recommend it enough to our bookends listening. And we can't wait to see what you're going to do next, because we hear hints that there's going to be some more from you soon.
Soon, maybe not soon, but
yeah.
I'm writing a new novel at the moment, but I would say that it's still at least a year away. So
we will wait patiently. We'll literally be waiting for a delivery in the bookstore. We can't wait. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. But before we let you go, can we ask for some recommendations of things that you've loved recently? We tend to ask for, if you've watched something great on telly, a really good song, or just something that you want us to know about.
Yeah, I've got so much to recommend. I'm rewatching Breaking Bad at the moment.
Yes.
Classic.
And really
So
enjoying like the dynamic between Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. I think that just went over my head the first time. So I'm really into rewatching at the moment. I'm also rewatching Girls, Lena Dunham's Girl.
I've still not watched that.
What?
No, I know.
So
I need to get to
You'd
it.
love it.
On my list.
I bet you.
Good. I didn't realize, like, so much went over my head the first time I watched it. And yeah, it's sort of funny because now that I've gone through what I've gone through with the novel, I see how annoying it must be for Lena Dunham that everyone just thinks that she was like playing herself, and that she copped a lot of hate for kind of making fun of herself for being so privileged. Her character like is annoying, but I think we need to like understand that she's talented enough to she intentionally wrote an annoying character. She's not just an annoying person. So it's funny looking back on how like little respect we had for like young female filmmakers then. But I'm liking that. And then Only Murders in the Building is my comfort watch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Steve Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. Yeah, it's like very comforting despite being about murder.
Yeah. I feel like Martin Short is my spirit animal. Like if I was to ever be a person, I'd want to be him.
It's funny. Everything he does cracks me up so much.
It's his face. He does so much with his face. He doesn't even have to speak. He's just like a walking vessel of humour.
Yeah, he's so funny.
I wanted to ask as well, you know, just to make myself really frustrated, are there any Australian authors or books coming out of Australia that you want to recommend for people to look out for?
Well, the big one would be Body Friend by Katherine Brabon. So I'm like, I have my laptop on a stack of books. I'm just checking.
I love that.
I've just been to the launch of a book called The Modern by Anna Kate Blair, and I don't know why, but I have a feeling I'm going to love it. She was working at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and then she wrote a story about a character who worked there. So that sounds really good. Hold on, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I mean, So Helen Garner, I'm not sure if you've heard of Helen Garner, but she's probably in her 80s and she's been writing books forever. And she's like the queen of Melbourne literature. And I've always loved her books. And she writes nonfiction sort of like court case. She goes into court and like covers trials really well. But she's also written these diaries. Now she's published her diaries, and they were written around the time I was born, and they're just like really good. And there's the sort of thing you can just read a couple of sentences. There's no like big narrative throughout, and it makes me want to write a diary. I want to keep a diary, which I don't do. I really should.
Yeah, I don't either. I think, you know, it could be so like precious to somebody one day, and like, yeah, I think it's also good for yourself to kind of get all your thoughts and feelings down onto a page. I mean, obviously you do that through your writing, I guess. But yeah, I think a diary is just such a great thing to keep, to like look back on, you know?
Yeah, and just to write about like little gossipy things that happened.
Yeah.
To be that super important.
I'm making it sound like really wanky, and you're just like, no, it's just...
Well, most of my diary, when I reread them, they're like the best bits are not the sort of big thoughts that are occurring to me. They're just sort of like little trivial thoughts that I had that I didn't think were that interesting at the time. And then reading back, I'm like, I'm funny. Or like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like just really dramatic things you write when you're hungover that you don't want to feel 24 hours later.
I'm never going to drink again.
I love how dramatic I feel after a heavy night. I just lie on the sofa like this, to be honest. That is what I look like.
Yeah. This is why I don't drink.
And that is a good plan. Okay, that's a good thing to end on. Pip, thank you so much for coming on to A Pair of Bookends. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. So thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you? Are you on social media?
Yeah, I have Instagram. So Pip Fink is my Instagram. And that's about it. I don't have any of the other ones.
Amazing. And for our listeners, Sad Girl Novel is out now and available to buy, I believe, in Australia, New Zealand, UK, and the US. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not out in the US yet. It will be coming out in the US, but it's already out in the UK and the other places. Yeah.
Yeah, they can pre-order. Our US listeners can pre-order. So that's very exciting that, you know, we're not gatekeeping this wonderful novel to many of our listeners at all. You're all getting access to it. Amazing. I'm going to pop a link in the show notes so you can all go purchase yourselves a copy, which we highly recommend. Although maybe take the day off work the following day because you will be up all night reading it.
So true.
And listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, as always, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so we can reach more of you. And if you'd like to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And thank you so much once again, Pip.
Goodbye. Bye.